Well, I think I rarely have visions of me in the future. So I tend to take what comes and bounce around from there. I don't necessarily say, I'm heading in this direction and here's my map and this is this is my plan, this is how it's gonna be. So when I was in school in Ohio at Kent State, and after I finished, I had met some folks who were also from Ohio and were planning to go to Minnesota. And there really wasn't anything in Ohio to keep me there, and I really had no interest in going back home to New Jersey, so I figured I'd go and see what they were up to. It was Bob Smith and Jeannie Petcher and her husband Bob and Susan Hook, and they were going to start a bakery in Minneapolis. And so it took me, I lagged behind them a couple of months, but eventually showed up, and we started the People's Company Bakery. And so that's sort of how my life as an adult began. And I think it was very helpful not to be someone who, for me, to not have plans about what my future will look like and just react to stuff as it came along. So I was here for about a year, and then I had wanted to see California, so I hitchhiked to the West Coast. Saw it and said, yeah, that's okay. I think Minnesota is pretty cool. I'm going back to Minneapolis. And when I got back here, I ended up getting involved with the Riverside Cafe right about the time that it was moving from across the street from the People's Center down to the corner of Cedar and Riverside. And it was such a welcoming community. I don't think I had ever felt as accepted in my life. It was just an amazing situation to fall into. I remember helping push the piano down Riverside from the Riverside Cafe to the new Riverside Cafe. I'm sure, now his name escapes me, Warren Park, who did all the piano tuning, really was not happy with us because I'm sure we didn't do the piano any good. But meeting wonderful, amazing people like Eric and Eve, who had been at Marshall U High and were really youngsters, and then Ellie, Ellen, who for a while I think was Ellie Goodell, wasn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I remember that. But Ralph and Grace and it was just it was like being in a fairyland, a magical place that you had to invent because it couldn't possibly be real. It wasn't just living in a heap, as Ralph used to refer to us, because we all lived in the same house or the same apartment or a couple of them, communal living. But there was more to it than that. Even though they weren't people that I'd known very long, it was the knowledge, not just the sense, but the knowledge that you were part of the group and you were had the same standing as anyone else, the same potential, whether it was to do a specific job in the group or whether it was to create a relationship or whatever. It was all there, and everyone was immediately. I remember my birthday that first winter with the cafe, and Betty Brenner, who was Betty Boop, who is still around, had made me a dress, and Linnea Torstensen had made me some little plant in a glass bowl with moss and things. I mean, it was just immediate. There were people around who wanted me in their lives, and I mean, we didn't necessarily talk about deep philosophical things. I think it was more investigating social issues, and not just social issues on the grand scale, but on a more personal scale, how you navigate being in a group, how you navigate creating something together socially, knowing that no one was more important than anyone else. It was just an eye-opening experience. And we did lots of experiments, like the eat what you, or pay what you can, eat what you need. And and there was, no one was wedded to doing something one way or another. We just kind of moved along, sort of like a slime mold or something. And, we got up to a lot of things. There was the Cedar Riverside Environmental Defense Fund to preserve the neighborhood when the developers were trying to tear down the buildings and put up high rises. And there was a lot of talent involved in working on those projects, creating the tenants union and then putting all the rent money in a escrow so that the developers wouldn't have any income, because they were using the income from the housing to as their cash flow for doing this big development program, building giant high rises. And the fundraising that we did with that, now there were a lot of people that Bill Teska got us connected to, people in his church who had money who were willing to donate. But Shel Danielson narrated our little fundraising slideshow. My partner then, John O'Laughlin, he was an electronics guy, and he did the electronics that made 2 slide projectors go at the same time that were connected to the audio recording that Shel had done to describe the whole process. And that was pretty incredible. And so we did a lot of fundraising to get money for this, because we had because there was we sued the EPA, and among other, and the developers, and it was a huge court case. It was amazing. It was just amazing. I mean, I could talk forever about stuff that went on then, but I made a lot of friends that are still my friends today, and that's pretty cool. I went on to decide to have children and sort of dropped out of that whole scene, and John and I became a nuclear family for a while, and then eventually I got to the point where I realized what I'd thought about doing, once again, plan versus just meander along. When I was about 10, I decided I was going to be a physician. So here I was, 30, with my second child, and thinking, all right, how is this going to work? So I did make a plan, found out what I needed to do in the way of prerequisites for medical school, and started taking classes. And my plan was to be in kindergarten, or to be in medical school by the time my youngest was in kindergarten. He was in, I think, second grade when I started medical school, so I wasn't far off. But I really felt very fortunate to have had all those years of just kind of doing what came at me, making decisions on an ad hoc basis, rather than, not straying from the path that was mapped out. And somewhere in along there, I became a single parent, and so was working and going to school and taking care of children. Was involved in the Seward Daycare Co-op, which was a great organization. It still exists. It meant the parents could spend time working in the school, either as like a grocery shopper or a cleaner or the chairperson of the cooperative, or doing actual teacher time, being part of the adult ratio to children, and pay for part of your child care that way. And that was really helpful. But eventually I had gotten done everything I needed to get done, and around that time met another man who eventually became my husband. But I got into medical school, and I think my children were very happy, because now they were preteens and teenagers, and they didn't have a parent, owling over them all the time. We had a pretty comfortable household. I don't know. Went on to do. I initially had wanted to go into pediatrics, and then decided that wasn't going to be enough, so I did my residency in internal medicine and pediatrics together, and then went on to my one more layer and did a fellowship in rheumatology. The pediatric rheumatology folks wanted me to spend a year in the lab, and I didn't think that was going to be useful to my life, so I didn't. So I'm not officially a pediatric rheumatologist, but I have all the training and did my, I don't know if you want to hear all these things, but ended up with a lot of pieces of paper to put on the wall in the bathroom, and then began work as a rheumatologist, which was probably the best job ever. Just fabulous. Something new every day, new puzzles, new things to sort out. I enjoyed working with my colleagues. We were probably it probably still is, because there are more rheumatologists in the group now. It's a group of private rheumatologists. Most rheumatologists belong to some organization of some sort or another, either a healthcare company or an institution like the U, and we were private independent. And so the biggest independent rheumatology group in the universe. So great fun. It meant you could, if you wanted to spend an extra half hour with a patient every time you saw them, that was your bottom line. So we still do get to choose how long we spend with our patients. It's just a fabulous way of dealing with it. And it's kind of, I'm a big mystery fan. I love reading mysteries. And so it's kind of like the ultimate mystery is rheumatology. Medicine in general, but rheumatology specifically, because there is so much that you have to think about and keep shuffling the puzzle pieces and trying to figure out what fits. Eventually, my husband developed dementia, and he was at home for quite a few years, and I was still working. And then it got to be too much to do, and so I retired early. Still a little nostalgic about that, but you know, life goes on. You just keep moving. And his last 4 years of his life, he was in assisted living and then memory care, because I just couldn't handle it anymore. And he died 2.5 years ago. So now I'm finally retired. And I get to do, once again, back to doing whatever I want that comes my way. And I'm an organized person in some ways. I mean, I like to have places for things to be, but I also tolerate some clutter. I'm a knitter. I'm a huge knitter, and so like anybody else who makes things, you've got to have a selection of materials to draw from. And so when you're a knitter, you have a lot of yarn. Some people call it a stash. I like to think about it as a collection because, you know, if you collect salt and pepper shakers, they're not things that you then have to do something with. So I don't really feel compelled to do something with any particular chunk of yarn I might have. It's there for inspiration or to think about color work or whatever. But of course, eventually you get hungry and that piece moves over and gets used up. So when I'm busy designing new lace pattern, or something like that, for a lace shawl, then yarn starts appearing from the corners of my house, wherever it's stored, and starts taking over. And eventually it gets calmed down again, and I don't look like such a crazy person. But I don't know, I've also gotten interested in genealogy the last few years. Don't know much about my father's family. An unusual situation. He was Irish Catholic, and he came from a long line of families, small families of Irish Catholic people. You know, two kids. I think his family, my sisters and I, 3 kids. That was an enormous family for him, because he had a sister, his father had a sister, you know. So it's interesting. I want to learn more about them. I'm working on it. It's slow going. My kids are fine. Roger's kids are fine. I visit them. We see each other. They come here. I go there. I enjoy traveling. I don't know what else to say at this point.
Let's just take it back to the foundation for a second. I mean, I'm curious Were you thinking about medical school before you got involved with the bakery? I mean, did you have this as kind of a long-term plan to which this was likely to be a detour or a buffer or something?
Well, I did decide, as I said, when I was about 10, that I wanted to be a physician. But not being one who really gets into planning, you can't go to medical school if you don't come up with a plan for it. So through college, I took a bunch of science classes, but not saying, oh, here's the list that I need to accomplish in order to get into medical school. I never defined myself as pre-med, but did always say, well, I'm going to go to medical school someday. And then suddenly I was 30 and had 2 children, and if I'm going to go to medical school, I guess I have to actually do something about it, because I never let go of that concept of Jean's going to be a doctor. So I guess I just needed to want to do it enough that I was willing to let go of, oh, there's a squirrel,
Not in the house.
distractions, this is a cool thing. I think I'm doing this.
Well, that's the picture I get, and maybe it's wrong, is that this life on the West Bank and around about was a leisurely life, especially compared to medical school plus being a single mother. Or how did it feel as preparation? It's such a difference.
Well, I don't think I saw it as preparation for medical school or preparation for learning how to be a hard worker. It was much more preparation for me to be a person in society. It was a lot of useful knowledge about myself and about how other people function and fit together. It was an eye-opening experience. I had lived a very, I don't want to say sheltered, but not a very expanded life. I went to a private girls' school. We learned French. We, did whatever we did, and everyone had summer homes somewhere in New England, and it was not. We didn't learn a lot about the world that was outside of the people that we spent time with. So being on the West Bank was an amazingly eye-opening experience. I met all kinds of people I would never have met in my life before. People from all sorts of backgrounds. So, and I think that's what kept me enthralled for as long as it did, was that it was so incredibly interesting. And I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed meeting people. I enjoyed it. It's not that we weren't productive on the West Bank. We were. We were, running a bakery or running a cafe is work. You've got to be there at whatever it is, midnight, when the music stops, and wash the floor and make sure all the dishes are put away and that the vegetables are prepped for the next day. And so it wasn't that it was, exactly leisurely. We did work hard, and then all the social stuff that we did in addition, like the Environmental Defense Fund. And people were starting all kinds of businesses, and there was a lot of networking going on, but they were all businesses that were had a goal of disseminating information about another way to live. So it was just a different kind of hard work. Medical school is, it's a slog. You don't have to be all that smart. You just have to commit to spending almost every waking moment. I should have turned that sound off. Almost every waking moment, stuffing knowledge, information, facts into your brain. And then it's not that you just then regurgitate it on a test. You actually have to use it when you're seeing patients and trying to sort out problems and find out what actually is going on here. It could be any one of these 10, no, 20, actually 30 things. And so which of the information that I have doesn't fit with problem 1, or possibility number 62, so I can eliminate that. But keep it nearby. So there's a lot of, it's just a lot of information that you have to have at your fingertips. It's not really, mostly not hard physical work. It's all up here.
You remember an encounter with something called the People's Bakery a little later than this story. It was, I think, on Randolph.
No, it was called the People's Company Bakery, and we had to because the People's Bakery was an actual family named People. Right. And so that was the People's Bakery. That's why we had to call it the People's Company Bakery. Mm-hmm. And it was on Lake Street at about 16th. Right. And it was there its whole life. It started out, we rented space at Bernie Nebel's bakery overnight. We did our baking at his bakery before we had our own space. But from, I don't know, summer of 71, it was on Lake Street.
What was your first job? What did you learn from it? Your first kind of job after college?
Well, that was my first job after college. I waitressed and stuff, but it was a collective. And we had weekly meetings where we discussed how we were going to deal with things. One person was the sort of the manager for a couple of weeks at a time. So if when you were the manager, I forget the title we had, but it didn't matter. If it turned out that the roof was leaking, then you had to do the research to find out what the best solution was, and who you were going to get to fix the roof, and bring the information to the rest of the collective and come up with a plan together about how to deal with it. It sort of all blends together, those years of working in co-ops and collectives, and the kinds of things I learned had to do with, was a lot of self-examination and learning, what's important to me. Is it my idea, or is it something that will further the group? And learning how to work with people. I think that was the most important thing that I learned in those years.
It does sound like good prep for becoming part of a rheumatology clinic.
Well, good prep for anything. Mm-hmm. Anything that I wanted to do after the co-op and collective days, I was really prepared for it, because I could sit back and listen to other people. I felt confident to speak up if I thought I had something valuable, because we were all equals. No one's idea was more valuable than another's. There wasn't a boss. So, and the rheumatology group I was in acts like a collective. Everybody's responsible for their own bottom line. Nobody owns the business. There is not a boss. I mean, we own it collectively. And I think, I can't remember, 1 year, 2 year stints as the sort of managing director, overlapping 2 at a time, and, you know, figuring out what needs to happen, monthly meetings where we talk about, okay, what do we do with this? You know, so it was very much like moving from my experiences with collectives and co-ops in the 70s to here I am in my work life and I'm doing the same thing. I don't think I would have done well if I'd been working for Park Nicollet or Health Partners or Alina or something. Not my. So I was fortunate that there was something that fit my style out there.
Now, we overlap in timeline pretty much and also overlap places a lot. I remember how the word counterculture kind of dawned on me as I was going to school. But you were kind of in the middle of at least 2 pieces of the counterculture. The idea of nobody being the boss, and the idea related to that of taking everybody seriously, regardless of all kinds of things that are regarded, as soon as you move about a mile further from the circle around
Yes.
the East and West Bank.
I mean, there were people during those days with severe mental illness who were considered equals and who were part of the group and who were not sidelined or, you know, put in a different category than anybody else. It just was the way we worked. I mean, it was a level of respect, I think, that you just don't usually see. Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember actually counterculture being a term that we used. I think it was something that the news media used to describe us. Hippies, freaks, dangerous. I mean, because I was at Kent State during the shootings, and I mean we didn't have the guns, so you know, you wonder who was more dangerous, but they thought of us as dangerous. It wasn't that long before that had been, you know, the HUAC trials and, you know, witch hunting. So I think everyone was used to operating that way. So yeah, we were seen as dangerous and not furthering the society as everyone knew it. We were anti-society, but we weren't really. You know, we were just wanted to look at things in a different way. We were being creative.
Although I'm really interested in how your personal style intersected with the times. And when you made this comment about how all those years making decisions on an ad hoc basis rather than following a rigid plan or trajectory, you know, and how well that suited you personally, but also how that really was sort of what was happening in this culture we all share.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, you'd be sitting there having coffee and someone would come in that you'd never seen before and they'd sit down and they'd say, I've just discovered this amazing thing. And then you'd hear the story and you'd think, wow, that is so cool. And then you'd tell someone else and then there'd be a whole pile of people at the table and you'd be talking about this way of thinking about something or way of doing something or endangered otters or Lord knows what. And everyone was on board thinking, wow, I never thought about that, but that's important. And information just sort of flowed organically. And if it was something that interested you, you could be involved in it. And if it wasn't, you could do something else. I mean, those were the years where the people's, there was their name for the building, but there was the dry goods store and the hardware store and the bookstore. Susan Hawk started the bookstore. It was on Riverside there in that little one-story block building, kind of across from the original North Country Co-op. Ina Haugen had her hats that she made, those made out of sheepskin that were woolly inside and then had knitted bands and ear muffs on them. Susan Hook is in my neighborhood. She lives just across the street. And she's one of the people from Ohio who came to start the bakery. Did you know about the project that someone from MCAD did a couple of years ago about the bakery? He started getting involved he's on the faculty at MCAD. He started getting involved in making bread. And then he started looking at bakeries in Minneapolis and how there are so few of them now and there used to be so many. And his research, he took a sabbatical year, and his research involved primarily looking at the People's Company Bakery. So in the Minnesota History magazine is an article from his research. I might have some extra copies, but and I'd be happy to give you one if I do. And then he interviewed all of us who were around. Jeannie Petcher came back from Ohio to be interviewed. We were all sat around a table. It was fun. But I don't remember how this led. Oh, so it just, there were so many ideas. It was kind of a renaissance of ideas. People were learning how to make things, how to farm. The Weavers Guild was getting started then. It was in Dania Hall. I was a member of that. And people were, you'd see people using drop spindles and spinning wool and just getting back to all kinds of skills and arts that were mostly being ignored and really had fallen out of fashion in the 50s and 60s. It was this explosion of new knowledge or adopting old knowledge and reusing it, like we're talking about the ironworking. There was so much going on, and there was so much to pick and choose from. You didn't just have to become a key punch coder at some bank. That was not the only job that was available to you. You could do anything. You could make it up.
So, I mean, I just finished watching Hidden Figures, which is a pretty good distillation of the kind of the sorts of people who were pursuing the American dream, where that meant a job in which there was a hierarchical ladder which, with some effort, they could climb.
Yep.
And so, I mean, the thing that the counterculture was countering in a certain way is distilled and also made kind of beautiful in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, what was it that was driving this other thing? I mean, you had everybody's parents, presumably, or a lot of people's parents, wanting them to go into the family dry cleaning business, or, as with one of my students, actually reserving an office in their aunt's dental practice for when they, you know, I mean, all of that had to be happening. There had to be
sure it
all
was.
this pressure from all these different directions to norm for all, on all these people to normalize. What did you see that was pushing back against that to make this atmosphere that you cared about possible? This kind of this sort of freewheeling and intellectually rich atmosphere. I mean,
Well, I think the fact that we didn't have cell phones and computers was helpful. No one could reach us. You know, my mother lived in New Jersey. I didn't talk to her unless she happened to call at a time that I happened to be at the house, if we happened to have a phone that we had paid the bill on. So a lot of us were really out of touch with our families because the people that we lived with were our families. And we were nourished and supported by the people that we lived and worked with. And frankly, I think for a lot of people, parents could be somewhat irritating. So it was really easy to avoid them. You know, you move halfway across the country and you don't have a phone, well, there you go. So I don't think the nuclear family was that important to us. I mean, there were lots of people who were becoming couples and having children and living in collectively based housing. So the children were cared for by more than just the parents, by other people who lived in the house. And so it was just another way of doing things. And I don't think we ever felt that we were pushing back. We didn't feel militant. We just felt that we were investigating our world and options that we had.
That's fascinating. So, I mean, it must have been hard, in a way, hard to leave that. I mean, leave that spirit, especially for something as structured and as different as medical school.
Well, I left because not to go to medical school. I left because I wanted to be a mother and I did not want to live in a heap. Because I wasn't willing to have my children brought up by other people. So I was being selfish, I think. I wanted to have control of what happened with my babies. So I think I mentioned, I became part of a nuclear family. It was myself and John O'Laughlin and our first one and then second child. And there were a lot of people who were having children then who were not having them in collective housing, cooperative housing, communal housing, that were separating themselves into nuclear groups.
When was your first child born?
In 75. So, and I think that was really it. It was just kind of a new and it's what was evolving within that group. There were lots of people. I mean, Ruth Ann and John Beach had their child and didn't live with other people. Well, for a while they lived with Ruth Ann's sister Linnea. And Ralph and Ginny had Bessie. Bessie and Ezra, my first, were, I don't know, 6 weeks apart, something like that. And Ginny and I co-parented, co-mothered. So if Ginny wanted to do something, I'd take both babies and we'd nurse each other's child.
Oh.
But really that was what was happening. That's where things were moving back to nuclear families. It didn't mean there still weren't collectives and co-ops and that people were involved in, but they just weren't living the same way anymore.
And what was in that decision? I mean, you enter into this life for a long time, and you find in it values that are really important that you haven't found in your life before, and the possibility for growth in a way that you hadn't found earlier. And then you decide that the spirit of this community is not entirely what you want marking your own kids.
Well, it wasn't that so much. I think it was much more, if I can steal another person's title, I think it really was a biologic imperative, where I wanted children, and my partner was okay with that, and we decided together that we wanted to live, together and not have this chaos around us that we couldn't control. We wanted to have say over what was in our space. And if I washed a bunch of diapers, I didn't want someone else walking off with them to polish a table or something. Because it's a lot of work to have a kid. And you don't want to invest all that work and have some of it dribble away into,
But you still nursed each other's babies. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there were
Yeah.
ways you were able to use the collective experience and make it part of your children's lives and your
Oh,
life.
yes. And they went to the co-op daycare center. And for quite a long time, maybe a year, every week I went to the Seward Cafe and I made a pot of soup for them. Their ingredients, but I made a pot of soup. And of course always still belonged to the grocery, the food co-op. Belonged to Seward Neighborhood Group. I was the chairperson of Seward Neighborhood Group for a few years. It never went away. It was all there. I was part of it. It just had different iterations. But I also knew that I have a powerful intellectual curiosity. And putting off medical school forever wasn't in the cards. So.
Well, I'm curious about, you're, now looking back from this perch I've recently clambered onto myself of retirement. Looking back over these various people you were and these lives. Well, partly, I guess I'm interested in how it is to be retired from all this. Does it feel like the next stage? Or does it feel a little bit like being cast out of Camelot? Or how does that for you?
Well, I think I'm in a very unusual position because although I retired from my work when I was 62, I had a full-time job at home with my husband with dementia. And we had a little bit of time to do some traveling before it just really was not working anymore. So, you can't leave someone alone. You have to be there. And so, and there's just a lot of personal connection that you have to maintain. I could have abandoned him. I could have said, okay, now you're in and I'm never going to see you again. But he was still had enough awareness that that he knew if I wasn't there, and on some level expected me to be there with him every day. Well, that wasn't going to happen. But I still had an enormous responsibility, even when he wasn't living in the same house with me. So when he died, it was, it felt like the end of oppression. So the first year after he died, I think I just, they always tell you don't make any plans. Well, I didn't, but it wasn't because I was following someone's advice about what to do when your partner dies. It was more that I was sort of falling back on old ways. Okay, I'm fine. I can buy groceries. I have a car. I have a house. There's nothing I have to do. So if I want to sit here and knit and listen to mystery books all day, that's fine. I can stay in my pajamas all day. I don't have to go outside. I'm in total control of myself now, whereas before, for many years, he had dementia for 15 years. I was not in charge of me. I mean, I was in charge of me, but most of my decisions were not based around me. They were responding to a need elsewhere. So, so I don't really feel like I retired until he died, because that was a big job. And so it took me a long time to figure out how I wanted to live in my new world. And I'm still pretty relaxed about how I spend my days. Every now and again, I swim, I do water aerobics at the Y 3 days a week, have coffee with other water aerobics women afterward. I've been doing this forever, since the year 2000. But it's okay if I don't want to change out of my pajamas. I just send a text and say I'm taking a snow day. Because that's what I need to do right then. So I can respond to me rather than responding to outside things, which I had to do for a long time. So no, it was not hard. I don't feel like I've been booted out of Camelot. I feel very fortunate. Whatever I can dream of doing, I can do. I could leave tomorrow and go to Morocco if I wanted to, and that would be okay. Or I could stay in my house all winter, and that would be okay. So I'm not feeling compelled to do any particular thing.
Do you still, or in what ways do you feel a pull towards community involvements of various kinds, or was it necessary to break off from them when you were with your husband? And
for several years, while my husband was home, I did volunteered as a homework helper at Franklin Library in the afternoons, a couple afternoons a week. But that got to be too hard. I couldn't be away. And I also volunteered at Avalon School. Do you know Avalon School? It's an amazing place. It's a charter school in St. Paul, but it's right where Franklin meets University, right just into St. Paul from Minneapolis. And they have, what's the word? Kind of project-based learning. It was just a high school, and then they added on some years ago a junior high. And so the kids all come up with things they want to investigate, and then they come up with a project they want to do, and it involves people in the community or other adults in their life, or and then at the end they do a presentation in front of their peers, and so they all get used to research and having their work. They give it to their mentors or teachers or whoever they're working with in the community to make comments on, and they bring it back and they edit it and refine it. It's just a fabulous school. So I was there as a kind of a math tutor, but I did all kinds of stuff. I was the responsible adult who was with the kids who wanted to knit, and just all kinds of stuff. That was fun too. But then I got to a point where I thought, well, I think I want completely unencumbered life, to be able to learn more about who I am and how I want to live what's left of my life, because in January I'll be 70, who knows how much longer I have. My mother had dementia, her brother had dementia, the only one of the generation past them that I knew had dementia. So I'm probably going to lose my mind one of these days. And so I need to, figure out how I want to live my life before I'm not competent to do it anymore. Got to write letters to my kids when I start having accidents with my car that I can't explain. When I get lost driving to so-and-so's house, that's the time to take away my keys. Signed, Jean C. Gorman. Now you have a copy. You can show it to me. I will probably tell you that you counterfeited my signature, but that's the time to take away my car keys. I can afford Lyft and Uber anytime I want. So, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
You're the same Jean.
I think I am.
Yeah. Well, it's we just have a couple of minutes, and maybe that is the last question. I mean, are you the same person? Is it plausible to say, in any reasonable way, that you're the same person that showed up at the bakery?
I think I am. I think I really am. I think the most amazing thing in my life that happened was getting glasses at the age of 12 when I probably needed them at about the age of 5, and not knowing not being able to tell if someone was smiling at me or had their eyes open or was even looking at me. So that was the biggest, most amazing thing in my life. And then the second biggest was being in that incredible explosion of a social experiment in the late 60s and early 70s. But I'm still the same person going through all of it.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you. This was more fun than I was